Okay, how's it going, you guys? Just setting this up real quickly. Welcome for those of you joining for the first time. Here with
Okay, how's it going, you guys?
live stream with me, Peter Hun.
Just setting this up real
And
quickly.
we
Welcome
try to
for
keep
those of
these
you joining for the
live
first
streams
time.
going once in a
Here
while, probably
with live
once
stream
or
with me,
twice a
Peter
month.
Hun. And
But
we
if I'm
try to
not
keep
on, I try to
these
take the time to be
live
able to
streams
actually
going once in a while. Probably it's been about like
answer
once or twice a
questions best I
month.
can.
But when I'm
But if
on,
that
I try to
happens,
spend the time to
and
be able to
and
actually
questions, I
interact
try
and
to get to them.
sketch
I don't
and
always get to
answer
them
questions best I
exactly
can.
when I see them.
Keep in mind the fact that, of course,
Depends on
anybody joining in,
roll through the
asking
feeds
questions,
like this
I'll
and
try
things
to
like
get to
that.
them. I don't always get to them
And of course,
exactly
anything
the
here in
moment I
terms
see
of
them
anything I
because
can
the chat
discuss or talk
tends
about
to kind of
answers,
update and roll
also
through the feed, so I
depends
miss some of them. So you have to ask
from the
again.
years
And of course,
of
everything
my
here
own
in terms of
personal
anything
experience
I
from my vantage
discuss or
point.
talk
So
about or answer
keep
is
that in
always
mind that
also just based
asking
on
these
my
sort of
opinion,
questions that
from the
you're
years
going
of
towards
my
what
own personal experience from my
what I get
vantage
towards things
point.
like
So
art
keep that in
related
mind that asking these
industry.
sort of questions that
Having multiple different sort
resort
of
towards,
frames of
or have
opinions
an
I
idea
need
towards things
to really
like
get a good
art and
vantage point
education,
of the
design,
answers.
industry. Having multiple different sort of frames
Is there a bit of double audio going
opinions
on? Let
are
me bring
needed
down
to be able
the
to get a good vantage
volume
point
a little
of
bit.
the average.
Maybe that'll help slightly.
Um,
Um,
there's a little bit of double audio going on. Let me bring down the gain a little bit. Maybe
Hopefully
that'll
it's
help
okay with
slightly.
everyone else.
Um,
But yeah, this audio thing has been kind of tricky ever since I updated my new computer.
hopefully it's okay for everyone
Hopefully it
else.
sounds okay when I watch the recordings.
But yeah,
So
this audio thing has been kind of
seems like the
tricky ever
audio
since
is
I
okay.
updated my new computer.
But
Hopefully
in that
it
case,
sounds okay when I
cameras,
watch the recordings. So when I watch it on
but either
YouTube,
way, I'll
it
try
seems like the audio is
to
perfectly
speak up
fine.
the best I can. I just repositioned
But
this a
it
little
might be
bit.
from your end or
Give me
something
one
else. I'm
second.
not
Just gotta
sure.
shake up the camera slightly
But
so
either way, I'll
it's
try to speak up the best I can. I might just reposition this a little bit. Give me 1 second. It's gonna shake up the camera slightly, so just hold on, because I need to lower
try
it
to keep
just
it
a
like
little
that
bit
and
more.
see if it helps. Um, if there's double audio, it might be recording. Oop, hold on.
We'll try to keep.
It was capturing two. That's why. It was two microphones that were on. Sorry about that. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that should have adjusted it. But in any case, keep me updated in terms of some of the audio stuff so that way it's not interrupting us. Let me make sure this capture is actually the right microphone. That's right. And I'm going to get rid of this one. That should be fine. I'll take care of it later on. Okay, so in any case, glad that's been resolved. But let's get into it. First and foremost, we're doing a live stream mainly because I have to actually work on something. So I figure, if I'm going to work on something, I might as well do it with a live stream and hang out with you guys because I need to, get this kind of like punched out. May not finish it entirely today. After the streams, usually if there's a little bit of touch up or some additional things I might need to do with different materials, I might do so. So we'll see how far I get. In terms of how long I'll usually be on, tends to be about an hour and a half these days. 2 hours is maybe pushing it, but we'll try to get there. Tonight it's a late night stream. It's about 8:20 my time right now, West Coast. So we'll see how long I stay on. In any case, questions are welcome. And questions please regarding towards the art industry, educational side of things. It can be personal, more general. If you also just want to talk about things, that's totally cool as well too. I'm going to be kind of like zooming in and out here and there because I'm working on a smaller piece of paper today. So because of that, I'm gonna have to zoom in a bit more so you can actually see what's going on. Just to set things up to show you, I will primarily be using this Tombow pen. This is a Fudenosuke. Should be readily available from most art stores, easily found in Asia. In US, I've seen them in packages, but the one I've been finding in the US is this one. The Tombow. This is the one that has it's like a black casing on it. They're slightly different. This one is a black handle, and this one is a blue one. The blue one, from what I can understand, is waterproof. The black one, I think, is not, because it's a different type of ink, from what I can understand. So that's why I'm using the blue one here. This is the Fudenosuke from Tombow. So this is what I'll be using for now. Paper-wise, as you can see, I am having a backing right here. This is just a kind of a rag paper that I like drawing on a lot, but I'm using it as a backing because it's a bit of a larger format. So this is right now a 8-inch by 8-inch, exactly 21 centimeters by 21 centimeters square. This is going to be for a sort of a gallery show, I believe, or some sort of event that's happening next year in Singapore. So this is for the Superani crew. So I'm working with obviously Superani, and we get to do a lot of different sort of like events worldwide and shows and festivals and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to be involved in submitting a piece here. So they requested me to do one. So the piece I'll be doing is kind of has a integration of Singaporean, you know, the sort of like the Southeast Asia sort of territory of integration of visuals, primarily of Singapore and of Korea as well too. Now I myself, being ethnically Korean, but nationally, American, the involvement part is going to be a little bit difficult. And I think in the past is one of the reasons why I've actually never attended the event in Singapore that Super has gone to, is because they wanted a lot of Korean artists. And even though I am Korean, by ethnicity, I have no connection really to Korea as a, as a person growing up, right? So being in the U.S., being so westernized, I barely speak Korean, and I can understand it fair enough. Speak it in terms of just general conversation, but not to the point of like officiating and that kind of stuff like that. But so it's like when they asked me to come involved into it, I was like a little bit surprised, and I guess they wanted me to come over there at some point. So I'll do a piece that involves two cultures that that I don't necessarily exactly represent, but still, there's no reason why I can't do an interpretation of things. And I've been doing a little bit of research. So what will I be sketching and what will I be drawing? So what I'm going to be doing and what I love to do when it comes to stuff like this, whether it's like different cultures, different ethnic background stuff, especially when it comes to creating a piece of art. I don't like looking at stuff that's so immediate in terms of, let's say, story or culture or even things like history, recent in the last, like, let's say 10 years, 10, 20, 30 years. I want to stretch back much, much further back. And this is why I love looking at things like mythology. And I love looking at things like even more natural things in terms of biological sort of stuff. So usually when I'm presented with like an illustration that I have to do, my favorite thing, people ask me how, in terms of what I like to draw. I don't really necessarily have one favorite thing because I love just drawing in general. But if I were to give you, let's say, an immediate sort of like jump the gun, if I wanted to go to something real quickly, would be animals. So usually I would turn to something like that. It's like, oh, what kind of animals exist and how have they evolved and what kind of environment do they live in? And so I would then look at that sort of like nature. This image will have some animals, but I'm leaning more towards more the people. So what I found uh, are two mythological characters. One in terms of like Singapore, Malay, sort of like region. A lot of people there are connected in terms of like language and mythologies and stories that kind of transfer, as well as like in East Asia, from China to Korea to Japan. There's a lot of things that we also tend to share. We, as in me ethnically being Korean, especially when it comes to stories and things that transfer over. So in that particular region of Southeast Asia, there's a character that I found called Badang, and he's a mythological character. In Singapore, people obviously know of that story. He's basically a strongman. He was gifted these sort of supernatural powers, and it's kind of like the maybe not as old as like a Monkey King story, but it's kind of like the Hercules, right, of Greek culture. So there's this character Badang, and being superhuman, he's got this nice little story in there about different tests of strength and stuff like that. So there's one where he lifts this boulder above his head and throws it into the Singapore River. The other one is for the Korean culture, and there's a character that I found also in there I didn't know about, but apparently I guess a lot of Korean people would be growing up with them as a childhood story. But it's a character named Banjogi. So Banjogi is like a half person basically, and this is a story about a young character who was born with this sort of physical, I guess, limitation, disability per se, where he's basically half a man. So he has one arm and one leg. But his story is all these like tests of character and tests of strength and tests of whatever, and he's able to get through those hardships and prosper at the end of the storyline. And both stories actually have this sort of like visual of them carrying rocks. So I'm actually going to use that as two mythological characters from different cultures, yet sharing this sort of relationship cross culture, and create this visual image. And I will include animals and things like tigers and whatnot, because in the story of Banjugis, he's going after the tiger. that killed his father, basically. So those are some of the integrations of what I'm going to put into this image, and we'll go from there. So I already have an idea of a shot, an idea of what's going to be happening, and we'll see if we can capture it. If it doesn't work out, it's like, do I have to do it again? We'll see. It's like, this piece is actually going to go into, I believe, a show of some type. So I want to make sure that it's a piece of something that I feel achieves a good level of quality, right? So we'll try one, and if I'm not fully satisfied by it, I might do another one later on, because I don't have to get it done for another couple days. But I might as well give it a go. So first questions, and I'll read the questions, and we'll start drawing. First question from Ahmed is: do you think self-taught is the way to go if you wanted to be really highly skilled? First question. In addition to that, is you personally don't think so. That's your answering. You need coaches and to really help reach those levels of skills. And so what's my view on that? I agree with you, basically. I think in terms of education, self-taught is a way, but I think it shouldn't be the only way. Vice versa, where university shouldn't only be the only way to be able to get your education. You have to be able to now take advantage of all these resources that are available to you in this day and age, whether it's through things like, free videos on YouTube or Skillshare kind of stuff, or online classes, and then even like universities and in-person classes. You need all of those incorporations, because then of course, yes, you do need people, not just even coaches, but even your fellow peers, other students that are on your same level, growing with you, to be able to get a sense of where you stand, skill wise, competition wise, drive wise, and if you lack that sense of drive and hunger, to be able to stoke it, to spark it with having others around you that do have it, right? So that's kind of the way I view it. Evan, welcome. And I did have fun at Comic Con in New York. Thank you for the question. Do I have my favorite superhero? Yours is Spider-Man. For me, I actually really enjoy. Well, okay, let me set it up this way. When I was a child, it was a common sort of obvious answer, which is Wolverine, right? Today, once I don't know, age, I guess, is a part of it, maturing and stuff like this. But as I got older, I got really into Silver Surfer. There's something about that character. It's kind of like the mythology again of it. He's this herald of this being from a different universe, essentially. And he's released to go find planets and stuff like that to defeat Galactus. But even him being a character of being Norn Rad and where he came from, and then he has to find this human nature again. But the stories being told through the eyes of other artists and writers with Silver Surfer is always really interesting, because it's always then an observation of humanity through his sort of naiveness, yet this ultimate being. So I really like Silver Surfer. Zenny's asking, what was your way of studying anatomy, and what would you do differently? Well, I just was in school, right? So being in college, I studied classes and stuff like that, and went under several instructors that were not of my choice, but people I thought were good. And from there, it's did multiple sessions and iterations of it, and tried the best I can. And of course, it didn't stop there. As I continued on past my education into working, as a professional artist, you still learn. And I wouldn't really change it, honestly. I would just do it the way I had done it, which was go through those necessary sort of disciplinary and structured sort of programs. Even today, if I was to go through it, I'd go through classes in schools. And I'm going to answer one or two more questions, and then from there, we're going to start drawing. Ahmed is also asking, any interesting facts about Katsuya Terada? It's too personal. Please don't tell us. I don't know anything really personal, but I've gotten to know him over the many years, just watching him draw and just saying hi, having quick conversations here and there. But nothing of interesting facts, other than the fact that he is very much just like us. You see some of these prolific artists, and you imagine to be sort of beyond human, right? That they have these capabilities of stuff, that they can just do things that we as normal humans cannot. We would see the same way with Jungi and many of the other artists in the past, and the many generations that come before. Even you look at someone like Mobius or something like that, and they would have that same sort of property. But at the same time, when you actually really get to meet them and see them in person, you're just well, I struggled also, and they had a hard time with this, and this is how I learned. I found my inspirations here. They're just people, They just have spent so much time into what they do that, the efforts, what they put in and what they can actually accomplish seems so effortless, right? And another question Sujita is asking, do I have any free courses? No, I don't, but you can go on here with me live right now and try to get some education out of it, right? And let's see. Then we're going to move down a little bit from the chat. So again, if I missed any questions, I apologize. All right, so we're going to start sketching and drawing now. So what I'm going to do at the moment, I'm going to put two characters. Now this is a small piece of paper. So I'm using this Furinosuke pen because it gives me a thin line. So I'm going to put two characters here, kind of looking at up angle. So the camera's low, tilting up this direction. And they're going to be holding up a boulder, a rock, in unison. So the character on the left will be Badang, and the character on the right, my right hand side, will be of Banjugi, the Korean character. And there'll be a big boulder, and I'm going to put animals and stuff on top of them. Now, because it's such a small scale, I'm going to be drawing very small. So I'm going to start the initial sketch, and you won't be able to see what's going on very well, but then I'll zoom in. Let me see what my maximum zoom is also, just to make sure. So we have the pen. We'll even use the pen as a test to see how far we can get in. Okay, so it looks pretty good. So you can see pretty clear still as I get closer in. I readjusted the top camera to be a little bit higher, so when I zoom into it, it doesn't lose focus. So for now, this is a square format, 21 centimeter by 21 centimeters. And what I'm going to do first is just get a sense of the character's hand placement. So the Malay character right here, I'm envisioning in my mind right now and kind of projecting it onto the page where the boulder is going to be. It's going to be kind of like around this area here. So that means I'm going to put the hand somewhere right towards top center in this section. So from starting about here, working my way down, what I'm doing at the moment is giving myself landmarks. So I'm not actually marking the page, but I am giving myself a general sort of idea as to like where things may go. Will I always like remember this exactly? No, but it gives me at least some form of a starting point. So from there, the head would be about here, down to about waist, down to about legs. So the legs I want to end in this position. I'm not actually against having the image of stuff going off the page in this situation, but I'm going to try to keep the characters in frame. Because we're doing an up angle, I want there to be this, maybe a slight foreshortening, but if I foreshorten the characters, it'll shrink the head of the character so small, you won't really be able to see it. And even in this situation, you're not going to be able to see them very well anyways. So let's put the character's hand right about here. Now, as I started just those marks, I'm going to zoom in here in just a moment. And hopefully it's going to be okay in terms of scale. We'll see. So let's zoom in. So what I've drawn right now is this is the underside of a palm. This is going to a thumb. This is the index finger, and it's kind of curled in like that. Okay, and this is wrist wrapping right around here, and this is going to go down now into the forearm. Now, as I said, I researched a little bit of some of the characters here, like Badang and Banjogi. I don't have exactly a single image that I'm drawing from, but I have not really references, but I did a general search on Google about who those characters even are. In that, there are some like images of things of like other designs or other characters. But again, I'm not using any singular image. It just kind of gives me an idea to play with. So the idea of reference collection for me personally is one of two ways. One, you can use a reference as a one-to-one, right? So that you're transferring the information as to what you see in a photograph over. And it could be of something one-to-one as in the image itself, or it could be also partitioned. So it's like I'm using the pose, I'm using the color set or the values or whatever the case is, the camera shot. So that reference could be specified to its use. But there's also the other type, which we do a lot in the industry, which is like a general mood board. And the mood board gives us a variant amount of images that gives us a sense about what the visual nature of style or elements and things that we can use to help kind of cultivate and create the image essentially. So what I have right now is not even an official mood board, just a general Google search. And from that, there are just like these random images that I'm not really even using per se. And Banjugi, the Korean character, there are no images. I didn't find anything. Badang, the Southeast Asian character, there are some there. So again, they're like designs of characters from a video game, but I don't like the look of it, so I'm not using it. The only image I found to be interesting were some shots from a movie that was made in Malaysia about the character. Because obviously this character kind of like crosses many different countries in Southeast Asia, where Singapore is independent, and they still use a lot of the storylines mythologically, so I'm going to use that character too. But I found some interesting like photos from the movie from like the '60s. So I thought that was kind of fun. Again, I'm not using that image directly. It's just inspiration. Okay. So here is the forearm. And as we go down, now I'm trying to think about what kind of like costume I'm gonna give him. And I noticed a lot of the kind of the Singaporean, Malaysian sort of styling has the head sort of wrapping. It's got the vests and kind of like knee-high trunks and stuff like that. So I'm gonna be using stuff like that to create this character. Also, and we're just gonna draw a little bit slow, attentive, just kind of making sure that I'm placing in what I want to place in. Maybe even like stop for a moment to really kind of consider. I also want there to be like visual effects, like water like kicking up and swirling and stuff like this. So I'm probably going to intermix them inside the image here and there, stuff like this. Visual effects. So from like the ground, there'll be swirling of like kind of like a power up. You see like in Dragon Ball when they do the leveling up and they have this flame of action, that sort of stuff. So sometimes it can be like purposeful, other times it's just more like a visual sort of representation of a sort of energy, I guess you would call it. I'm trying to like figure out like where I want stuff. And actually put his thumb on the wrong side. And that's okay. So you see that? I put his thumb on the wrong side. I was trying to figure out like where his hand position was, but we're gonna use that. So in mistake making like this, I'm not worried about this part because there's gonna be ways to integrate it. But I had to think about it. It's like, wait a minute, like what position was his hand? It's gonna be on this side. Here's his elbow. Here's his shoulder, left arm. So obviously, then if it's lifting up like this, his thumb will be inwardly towards his head. So this is what you're seeing right now. What I'm doing is I'm kind of like physically sort of visualizing through my own body. So if I'm going to do a pose, I'm going to go through the action of my pose, right? And so as I do that, I get a sense of like where things are. But as I made a mistake, I'm not worried about that because he's going to be holding something up here. So I'm going to have all these other elements to like integrate it. So don't worry about that part. We'll get to it soon. So if you're making mistakes, it's all right. Just keep moving forward. Keep pressing forward too. Like don't give up on it too quickly. On a piece that you guys are working on, if it's a personal piece, if it's like an educational thing, if it's a project that you're working on, even if it's like a professional thing that you're doing, if you're sketching, drawing, designing, creating, illustrating, whatever you're making, if you notice like there's something sort of like going off a little bit, just stick with it a little bit longer because you're going to be able to potentially problem solve it. And that's kind of the job really, is that we try to problem solve, and mistakes are going to constantly happen. Like here, there's mistakes. That's a mistake. But I'm not here to present this sort of tomfoolery that I think I need to present this idea that I can master everything. It's like, no, as we create, I'm gonna misjudge and misplace and make mistakes constantly also. But the thing that has to be presented is, well, if everyone's doing that, if everyone's making mistakes, as everyone usually should be, what do you do in those situations? It's like, how are you actually going to get past it, and what's your frame of mind? For a lot of people, if they're doing this sort of stuff and presenting on to a stream or showing it live, I mean, you would probably freak out, shut it down. It's like, I got to start over, and you want that kind of memory to go away. But eventually, at some point, you do enough of it, and it's like you can already kind of see it down the line. It's like, oh well, no, I'm going to be able to use that, and I'm not going to be too worried about it. Could there be a case in which I could make a mistake, and it will be so sort of like heavy in terms of its sort of immovability of its, I guess, mistake making. I can't actually alter it, change it, save it in any way. Could that even happen? Oh yeah, absolutely. And what that would be is mostly proportion for me, But then you would think, man, that's a really big mistake, though. You know, it's like you put the thumb on the wrong side. It's like, well, in that situation, yeah, but I think I still can save that, which is why we're still going. But usually for me, proportion would be one of the key things. Like, I'm gonna maybe try that one over again. I want to make that swirl of action continue around this way. These are going to be the lower part of his pants. Let's put his other arm here, just to get that one started. And I'm going to try to draw a little bit more, not lightly, but with less amount of detail per se. I'm trying to minimize the amount of like strokes I put down these days of sketching. The sort of economy with line is kind of the concept. I will tie his pants off here. And we're just going to kind of feel through sort of the movement of the pose and some of the line work. I want there to be just a little bit more freedom of movement and not be so restrictive to be like tight. I'm wondering if I want to even like break the ground up a little bit, sort of like with debris and rocks and stuff like that, crunching up from all the weight and pressure from above them. Thinking about it. Kind of like stuff like this. We're going to get to some of the other questions in just a moment. Hang tight. I just wanted to get started and get a good amount of this sort of rolling. You're going to see this sort of indication technique where I'll come in and draw in some portions of detail, but then I'm kind of letting the rest of it go. But in your mind, you think like, but there's, you know, 2 more toes. You got to draw this toe and that toe. But it's like, you don't have to. People understand that it's a foot, and I can just suggest it. So then I have less line. Trying to compact so much information in a very tight space is not always ideal. So being sort of decisive as to like where you're putting that information is something to consider. Even this foot here, it's gone. I'm not going to draw it. And it's not because I can't, because I don't need to. Let's go up to this hand again over here. I'm trying to get a sense about which way do I want the hand, fist, maybe like this, open, clawed position, something like that. Same thing, I just want the hand to be more of a suggestion. At this small scale of a drawing, it's like I don't need all that in there. I'm going to position the head. He's going to have a wrapping around his forehead. We'll keep that open for now. I'll come back to it. So the rock structure, this boulder, is going to come underneath. Below here. Tip of it will be on this side. And in between these sections, I'm going to put like animals above and kind of like coming over. So I'm going to put the other character kind of in this position, coming down this direction over here. Let me see some of the questions above. First, what kind of paper am I using? This is the mulberry paper that I really like. You can see the kind of the toothier edge, and it's really thin. It's like tissue paper, and it doesn't really bleed through all the way. It comes through a little bit, but even if I put a lot of water on this, it won't really like buckle up and wrinkle. It's really tough. Like it doesn't tear very easily. You can cut it, but obviously, but tearing it is actually kind of tough. This is a long fiber of material. So this is the mulberry tree, and mulberry again is used for many different sort of resources of things in Asia. But paper making is one of them, and so yeah, this is a really nice paper that I like using to draw with, and you can get it online. The store that I go to here in the U.S. online is called BlueHeronArts.com, I believe. You can get it in Asia pretty easily. Obviously, from China to Korea to Japan, all make their own sort of like type of it. Used for things like calligraphy work and Chinese ink brush sort of stuff, but it's a nice paper. Inky Pen's asking, what do you think of using cheap sketchbook paper for drawing for pen drawing to take away the pressure of perfection? Even if you're using a high quality paper, it shouldn't really add to the pressure per se, but I understand why it would. I'm saying that mainly because after a certain amount of experience, I can let that sort of pressure go. But it doesn't mean that it's not necessarily present in mind. When I say let it go, I'm able to at least recognize that sort of pressure and recognize the train of thought where it goes down. But I'm able to release it because of the experience of being able to fall back on that. Now, in the beginning, when you're younger, of course, that perfectionist mindset and the pressure will be very real and very hard to overcome. So yeah, if you can use different sort of materials to release that, that can maybe be a form of practice. But here's the thing: is that really going to relieve the pressure away from using future good materials? I mean, if anything, it may exacerbate that, because if you're using cheap materials and you feel comfortable using them, and all of a sudden you spent, months and months, maybe even years practicing, and all of a sudden you have a really good piece of paper. Do you think you'd be like, well, I trained so much, I feel pretty good, I'm not going to be any pressure to draw on this really nice piece of paper? No, it's going to be even higher, right? Because you've now built up so much of this sort of like idea of this really high end piece that you don't want to mess it up. And after all that training, now you have to be able to perform. You can imagine it's like you don't even want to touch it. So my suggestion is like, yeah, use that cheap stuff, but use it in conjunction with the good stuff, right? Link it as a linear sort of like progression. Start with the bad sketchbook, do some quote unquote crappy sketches if you have to call it that, and then move on to the better piece of paper to produce a higher quality piece, and see if that training will help out, right? Hutu's asking, how would you recommend growing an art channel without fan art but your own original art? Turn to things you love. As I mentioned earlier in the stream, I love going to things like animals and mythology and creating from those things that already exist in our world or through imagination. Mythology is from the imagination of people writing stories down initially as religions and stuff like that, but then become stories of our culture. So use those things. At the end of the day, you might think, but isn't that fan art also? Well, if it's your take of something, why couldn't it be fan art, right? For me, I'm saying that I'm not using like contemporary trends that are just popular that everyone else is doing. But we have these sort of public stories and mythology of all cultures that you can use, but also find ones that maybe they're not as touched as much, and use that as a jumping off point, right? Mike is asking, what you're really bad at watercolor. Can you tell me how to improve in watercolor? You just use it more. You can take a class if you want to, but there's nothing else you can really do other than just getting more comfortable and familiar with that material to see what resulting actions you get out of it and see the comparisons of contrast. So that's really the only thing you can do, right? There's no like automatic download button that you'll just now all of a sudden feel good about drawing in watercolor. That's not going to happen. So, and even then, taking a class is not going to do that either, too. But at least it creates an environment that allows you to be able to explore. And the exploration is really the key. I'm going to put the other character here. And he's going to be kind of like in this more looser tunic. Sort of shirt. I want to make sure they're kind of leveled up in terms of matching their scale and position So I'm seeing his belt. I'm going to put his belt over here. And he's going to have one arm missing. So I'm actually going to like tie it off. So you can kind of understand that there's a sleeve there, but there's no arm. So I wanted to create this sort of like parallel of these characters that have a slight similarity, even though they come from different cultures. And his head's going to be up here. He's also going to have a headband that's a little bit different with the sash coming off of it. A bit of longer hair. From this, his right leg will be missing. So I'm also going to put that on a tie. And his left leg will come down straight to support his standing position. This will also be tied off. He'll have a leg wrap. We'll see more of the kind of like lower ground plane breakup happening with this similar sort of like swirl of effect happening as well too. This sort of visual effect is pulled heavily from a lot of mangas and stuff that I've grew up as a kid. And so again, the stone is coming underneath the boulder here. I'm going to put a couple of different animals around at the top here. Let's see some additional questions real quickly. Zenny's asking, any tips for drawing mecha? Many people talk about joints, but is there anything else to do better absorb information? Well, the joints are for the articulation, about understanding the mechanics of movement, right? So looking at natural biological joints to even mechanical joints are great, because then you understand the range of articulation that goes into things like hinge joints, rotational joints, pivot joints, ball and socket joints. You want to know all the joint systems. But really, if actually anything else, when it comes to looking at mechs for myself, what do I pull from as inspiration the most is actually natural things, as I said, animals or humans. So most mechs that you draw as being more fantasy based tends to be inspired by the natural world. So this mech that I might create might be similar to like an animal, like a tiger. Or if I'm going to draw another mech, maybe it's very similar as a humanoid, right? But as you do so, using the anatomy is what I get inspired by. So imagine if I took the deltoid, right, the muscle groupings in the deltoid, and you converted those into panels, coverings and panels that cover the internal frame of the mechanical structure. So imagine now muscle groupings as panel parts for machine. So you can design those shapes in different ways, but we can still use the anatomy on the human body or the animal body as the key shape inspiration for designing those parts, right? I'm going to go down a little bit. Ashton's asking, sometimes you struggle with retaining skills in art. You gain them and an understanding, and when I go to train something else, you lose a bunch of the knowledge. Any tips of retaining the information? So the only way to really retain it, in my personal opinion, is to use it. So when you go from one, sort of training, sort of experience moment to then moving on to something else, the problem is you are leaving behind what you learned before because you're trying to now focus on what to do next. Meaning, if I learned, let's say, about perspective, right? And then you went to an anatomy class. And now I'm learning anatomy and learning how to draw that anatomy based on what the instructor tells you to do. So because you're doing what the instructor wants you to do, you're not necessarily thinking about what you did before in perspective classes because you're focusing on so much of what the instructor wants now. But they don't know what you've taken, and it's not their responsibility as an instructor to be able to tell you how to even mold those things together per se. Of course, there are some classes that may incorporate and hybrid those elements together, but if there's a fundamental class that's more specific to, let's say, like anatomy, they're not going to say, well, now here's how we use perspective with anatomy. They're not really going to do that. It may touch upon things like optically or just more sort of like generally, but not in terms of like a specific sort of exercise to show you training to get to those points. You kind of have to kind of do it yourself in that situation. But it's your responsibility then to bring in the prior sort of training and bridging that gap to the next sort of training that you're doing afterwards. So, the problem with education, and this is what I usually say, and people may have heard this before already, but I think most people treat education, especially online, as a shopping list. These are all those stuff classes I have to take. You take it once, you check mark it, next class. It's your shopping list, right? So once I've taken all the classes, well, I'm done. I can now move into like intermediate levels or advanced levels. And I'll try to make a portfolio and maybe apply for a job without really sort of like integrating the classes that came before and after and putting them together because they're all segregated into their individual experiences based on the list of what you've acquired from the understanding of what other people have done. But what you don't necessarily understand at that point is that what everyone then has to do on their own through their own self-discipline and their own self sort of like education through action and mileage is how do we actually not just take those individual classes but then layer them together. So then how do I take perspective and integrate it with my character work or anatomy work? Because even though an instructor in the anatomy is not telling you to, you yourself should be thinking about, well, if I then created a character in environmental space with perspective, maybe I'll try to put those together. It may not be necessarily even homework that that person's giving you, but you will take the action and be able to try to integrate it together. So the only way to retain that now is to use it, right? It sounds like a tough thing, but that's the demand. Have you ever had periods where your focus is lacking? Yeah, sure. During school, it'd be hard because I was so tired, or so distracted by other things, or whatever the case is. Well, the mistake was still right there. That right there, you have two thumbs, right? So the thumb is supposed to go this way, which I included, but that finger right there is not supposed to be there. So what I'll do with that is I'll hide it. How? I'll probably put some rock structures and shadow shapes or something. I'll kind of hide it in that piece. It'll be gone. I'm not worried about it. So the only thing I'm having it's difficult in this situation in terms of drawing right now is because of how small this thing is. And the problem is this sketch is actually a little bit further away from me because I have to position it under the camera for you guys. So right now I can only see so much of this space. So if I were to draw right now for myself personally, if I zoomed out, like this is where I am right about here. This is how far this away is. So this is my arm at the moment. If I was to draw this on my own, I'd be holding it this much closer, like that. So I can actually see down towards it. So I can see the scale. So right now it's out to here. So even just that slight distance is enough to make it challenging. So it's challenging, but not impossible. Will I use this exact piece for the gal? I'm not sure yet. I'm just doing it right now, just to do it on the stream. It may be a case where like, oh, I want to try another version, especially like in this case where it's going to be for like a gallery or a print. I've done this in the past. It's like I would do a piece just to feel it out, and I would do another one, or even a third or a fourth if I have to, just so I can give myself, an idea of like where it is and how I feel about it, and it's really going back to that mileage again, just drawing, just to see. And I've done this for pieces that were large, and I've done this pieces that were small, for big clients, or like a client piece that really wanted a personal illustration or something. Um, there have been cases like that where I would start over again, just because it's not because I felt like this isn't working, but I'm always kind of curious as to like where it can go, you know. These days I don't really work this small of scale. I actually like working larger. In the past, I used to always use like really small sketchbooks, like moleskins and stuff like that. Um, but I'm not a fan of moving so or going so small these days because it's such a tight, restricted movement. Not really into it. Sorry, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit here. So I'm gonna create a bit more of the rock form. Here's more visual effects stuff. This is also why it's like I don't really feel this sense of urgency or this sense of pressure to make this exactly as it needs to be because I know I can do it again. you know, I can do it again, and I can probably do another good one. And even if it's one that I won't do again, there's always that feeling that I can easily pull it off another time if I need to. Um, there's no pressure behind it because of that. Just give it a go. And if it doesn't work out, it's okay. Move on to the next one. So that's why I'm always like looking forward to the next drawing, the next piece, even if it's the same one, because I love how things just like turn out. Like where does it go? What happens? What am I thinking about? Where do I start to even, you know, ill plan or things I do like, mistakes that can be poor or great. A mistake can end up being a positive thing because at first maybe you didn't intend something, but as you actually did it, you realize, oh, that's actually a really nice touch. That's what we call the happy accident, right? Um, those sort of moments can only happen if you're actually generating stuff constantly. And we're not doing it just yet, but I'm gonna start to push in like shadow shapes and hatching a little bit here and there just to see where that goes. Also, I'm trying to get a sense of like stylistically where I want to go with this still too. You can almost say that this would be considered the sketching phase, the sketching phase of the piece I need to generate. And the sketching phase for me is always the part where I'm trying to understand something. It's still permanent. It's still me just going straight into it, but it's still me trying to actually figure out like what is it I even want out of this. So sketching allows you to explore and get you a solid sense of a direction as to where to go with it next, even if it does mean that you have to like try again. So then if I get a certain result of an outcome that I like, then I would maybe do like the official illustration behind that. And that would only just be bridging over some of the experience from before. I'll still do it pretty much the exact same way in process wise. Um, so for some people, this could be even considered like the thumbnailing stage in a lot of ways. So when it comes to the word of thumbnail, I think most people would consider the thumbnail as being like, oh, it's got to be small and rough and scribbly, but not necessarily. I think sketching as an umbrella of a terminology is what I said earlier about exploration of a concept. So whether the drawing is fully tight and detailed, the intention is to try to find out what's happening. So with the intention in mind, I know that this is still a sketch. Whereas like a drawing or illustration would be more the piece in which I would be satisfied by its result that I can then maybe submit as the official asset in the piece. Um, so that's kind of the way my mindset goes into these sort of like iterations. Let me read some of the other questions here. Do you have any tips to avoid on how to avoid self-judging art or sketches? Well, just recontextualize it. Use different words if you have to. Literally, just like say it differently. Instead of judging, maybe it's an analysis. Maybe it's a I mean, it's a process like anything else, right? You have to turn it into something where it becomes positive in nature of action, because you cannot do that, right? You can't not look at something and think, even if it's your own work, oh, I wish this was better, or I wish that was better. I like that part, and I like that part. Um, but I think making a different sort of mind frame about how you observe the piece, and a change of words might be helpful in that part, because it can then potentially recontextualize as to what your actions are doing. It's not a judgment based on your inability or your lack of skill to do something, but more that you recognize that, oh, I could improve that part, but now what are my problem solving methods to do it, right? I'm not necessarily, let's say, let down that I can't do it, but what can I do to help me get a better result in that piece? So it's an observation. It's a not a judgment. It's something that you want to make sure you give a chance to say, there's always room for improvement, and hopefully that can assist that a little bit. But then from there, it's like you just build a thicker skin in time, and that's where education steps in, right? Because it's not just only the self-judging, but hearing it through others can be equally as sort of like um, traumatic for some people in some ways. But at the same time, it does build that thicker skin that you do need. It is the nature of our industry. Let's see. I'm gonna put like a head of an animal. Like I said, I'm gonna actually have this go off the page. I'm gonna have things go off the page that way too. I need to see that, because at first, whenever I create these images, I'm always trying to contain it within the border of stuff. So these days, I'm also trying to let go of that and just draw right off in different directions. So I'm gonna actually have the tiger come down here. I'm gonna have things go off the page. Off the page. I'm gonna have an animal's head come down this direction, as if there's a giant mountain above them of stuff. I'm still trying to figure out if I want this to be a little bit more on the stylized side, like a cartoonier side. The characters are somewhat there on that side of it. Or to be maybe a bit more natural, but I'm also on the side of being more, not cutesy, but less serious in terms of visual look these days. Which I'm going to push the eyes to be a bit more stylized friendly. Space is asking, have I ever had pain, wrist pain, or hand pain when drawing? Curious if you stretch your wrists often during your drawing sessions. I talk about this a lot in my classes, especially in the beginning of my dynamic sketching class, about sort of the warnings when it comes to the physicality of drawing. Because of what I literally say is that I think drawing can be physically detrimental to your health. I myself haven't had a lot of problems in the hand or the wrist, but I had a lot of problems in my neck on this side, left side. So I would, when I would draw when I was younger, I would kind of hunch over turn my head like this and lean real close to the paper and draw. And I would hold that position for so long, all the muscles here would get tense and pull, and my head was literally crooked like this when I was in college. And the only way I straightened it out was by working out as much as I could. And then I got stronger and looser, but that was a huge problem for me. But in terms of hand and wrist, I've never had an issue, thankfully. A lot of it is just being attentive to first how tight you're gripping. You gotta loosen that grip as much as you can. And the only way I tell tell my students basically is to take away your tool out of your hand. When you're drawing and you're tensing up, you're not paying attention to that anymore. You're paying so much attention to what's going on here because you're so worried about like messing up or the outcome of the actions of things that you just get so constrictive because you think that's going to help in terms of controlling the actual outcome, which is not. And I'm sure it's obvious that it doesn't, but you can't help it physically. So the only way to mitigate that is to physically take away the tool by adding a timer. So maybe you'll sketch for like 20-30 minutes, and at the end of that time, take that pen away out of your hand and just give it a moment to just like re-grip, loosen up that grip, right, and then come back into it. And I'm not saying you got to take like a 10-minute break sort of thing. Literally just a few seconds just to grip. And even if you do it more often than not, it may help you pay more attention to what's going on here. Okay. Right. Loosen the grip. So from that, other than that, is to make sure you got to get blood flow going. So this is where, stretching is important, but movement. You got to just move. Move the hand, move the muscles, sort of like get that activity up. So, there are exercises you could be doing in terms of like, sort of like grip exercises, even chair exercises you can kind of do. Sometimes I'll actually even like lift myself up once in a while, just kind of like readjusting my sitting position and just to get a little bit of arm movement in place. That kind of stuff can be helpful. Whatever you can do basically to kind of get body movement kind of interjected. So I'm going to put that one there. We'll put another creeping big cat here. As I said, this is me trying to explore like where things will go. I got it for people that are joining in. I'm doing a piece for a potential future Superani gallery show. And it'll be in Singapore. So I'm trying to integrate visual themes of character and mythology that I researched within two cultures. And this particular piece may not actually be the actual drawing. And so I'll at times give myself a chance to be like, at least explore what the outcome will be like. And that's what I wanted to do on camera, just to explore the first sort of like visual take as my first time really just giving a take on this. Simply due to the fact that one, it's playing with certain characters that I'm not 100% familiar with. Two, sort of like a visual that was something that was sort of like set in my mind, but I wasn't sure exactly if that was what I really wanted to go with. So I had to see it. I'm going to be using some hatching. I know somebody asked about like my thought process of hatching. We're not really doing hatching just yet, but we'll try to get to some if I can here. If that's something I'm going to do even. Like I said, I haven't fully decided as to like stylistically where I'm going to go with this. Just silhouettes maybe of other animals around. Zenny's asking, how did I get into Superani? Sorry, I lost the question. And what are the benefits of being in the group of artists? Well, for me, in terms of getting into, there was no really getting into because there was never an intention of trying to get into Superani in the first place. when I officially joined, it's because they asked me in 2017. But the only reason I did join is because they wanted to work with me to do publishing of books. Um, but how did it even start? I mean, we're just friends. And people wonder, it's like, Superani artists seem to have a lot of like very similar sort of methods and themes and approaches to how to do the work. But it's like, we're all independent artists and we all come from our own backgrounds of things that we do. And by, sort of like chance of the way we kind of came about things in our work, because there are a lot of, sort of like parallels and interests and themes of stuff that we really enjoy for each other, but also in the fact that we would then see each other at things like conventions and shows. We became friendly. Um, there was a friendly competition aspect to it as well too, that we were drawn to each other in a lot of ways, I would say. I think that would be the best way to put it. We were just drawn to each other. um, is there a benefit though? Joining a group of artists, not necessarily even Superani, but joining a group of artists in general. I mean, for me, I've had groups of artists that I would join since I was in college years. In high school, I had maybe like one friend I got together with all the time, but in college, I had a core group of friends that I grew up with, that we got together to work all the time. Um, and there was a huge benefit to that because, like I said earlier, in the beginning of the stream, it kind of really shows you where you stand in your skills, in like your interests, sparking that drive, um, getting assistance and encouragement, getting feedback that's necessary, and just having like-minded people, essentially. So in my college years, I had that, and a lot of them remain lifelong friends. But then after that, I started working full time and working in the game industry, and then I started going to like independent work and running my own schools and teaching a lot more. And I became friendly with Superani because of conventions and comic cons and stuff, which led me to create another sort of like pool of individuals that were even greater of skill, right? So why wouldn't I be drawn to that? Especially if I just were just friendly with them in the first place. Um, and because my background was so much in just like ink drawing, that's what dynamic sketching was about. We just drew with pen all the time. And the live drawing part was really very much sort of grown because of my education from teaching. When I would teach, I would just have to draw in front of people. So that in itself also, I think, created that sort of mentality of what Superani artists were about, which is to perform live, if anything else. Perform live and to be able to share. Imagine rocks, kind of pebbles falling off of this thing. I may want to put them closer together, kind of overlapping. Um, I might try to push the angle more tilt so I can see more of the stuff above here. But I don't mind the compression, and I don't mind it going off the frame. I don't know if I want to really do a lot more foreshortening on them though, because again, that would shrink the scale of this stuff way smaller, and I'm not a fan of that. Um, so yeah, we'll see. Idea Junkie, thanks for the donation. I appreciate that. People support on the channel, doing these sort of super chats and donations and stuff, which I'm not super familiar to. I just run it the best I can on YouTube, honestly. So, um, but it does help in terms of like me giving time and spending a couple hours just hanging out. And I granted this is stuff I'm going to be doing on my own anyways, but to be able to talk and answer questions and chat with you guys is something I'm trying to put effort into and something I like doing. But it is nice to be supported so that this will keep bringing me back, because that time could be spent on actually working. So not to say that this is not working, um, by the way, you get what I mean. But the question was your comment: what kind of paper do I use? What is comfortable for me to use? Large area or just regular A4? Do you use more loose leaf or sketchbooks to draw? It's basically everything you just stated. This paper is the mulberry paper. Do I find it comfortable? Yes, but I find most papers to be comfortable. This is like a rag paper that I picked up at like a local art store. I love Bristol. I like sketchbooks. I like vellum paper. I like marker paper. I like even just printer paper. And the sizes go from A4 to 11 by 17, A3 size or more. I've worked at larger. I've worked on 10-foot walls. You know, I've worked on canvases. I've worked on linens. I've worked on all types. Surface doesn't matter for me. You know. So in terms of that question again, it's like it's been everything, all and more. Do I have a preference for something? It can shift. It's not like I found a preference for one thing and stuck with it for my entirety of my career. It tends to shift around based on a new discovery, or I rediscover things something again if I've already had. So right now I'm kind of on this like run where this paper right now I'm in love with. The mulberry paper I've been in love with for like the last year. Why? It's not. I don't think it's because it's the best paper, but I think it does have unique properties, and it's just very very interesting in terms of how it reacts to ink, and just what it can do. So I find it to be very very. I'm very fond of it. Mulberry paper. I initially thought I wanted to do like an ink wash on this, but you know what we're gonna do is just stick with just black and white, just to play with maybe like graphically separating some stuff using more hatching techniques maybe too. I think in the next round, if I do this into more of the finish, I might try something else in the material. Like this brush pen's great, I like it, but I want maybe to have a bit more of a softer brush quality, and I might use a brush pen, maybe natural brush, maybe. But I need it might be too thick for this scale, but yeah. Sneeble's asking, what do you think about taking a break every 25 minutes for 2 minutes? I think that's great. Do it. So with this, we're just gonna fill in darks like this. We might do a little bit of hatching, not so much, but what this will give me is an idea about just general value groupings, some of the shadow shapes. More concentrated. It's not as widely distributed, but it's okay. So like right here in the underside of the rock, I want to push this down a little bit. This is where I might incorporate some of the hatching methods just to kind of see. And what I'm going to do is use this dark shadow shape to kind of silhouette him. Dark shadow shapes behind the rock, silhouette them. Now that's where that thumb disappears. So the hatching system that I'm using right now is kind of like this choppy plane that's happening. And I'm moving this direction specifically to kind of go to the underside of this plane object. So if I hatched vertically like this, it would make it feel a lot more flat and a lot less dimensional. So this right here, this whole side of the rock is the underside of the rock. So the best way to think about it is, hold on 1 second. I'm going to use a piece of this paper that I'm not going to plan to use. It's just a throwaway. But the way to think of this piece right now is like this. Very shallow here. So the horizon line would be like right around there. So I want the figures to be kind of like this slight up angle, which is why their cross contours are turning up this way. You'll see it turn up this way, turn up that way. And so you have this swirl effect from the ellipse down over there. And this is a very shallow level, very shallow. This might be a little bit more than I have it right now, but it's much more shallow than that. As in like thin, as an ellipse. So because this is the underplane of that boulder structure, basically you would imagine hatching wise, I'm going this way. So there can be slight shifts, this, up, but I'm not really going to go vertical. So that's why this hatching on this side, I'm going this direction to follow the sort of natural path of the underside. So if I was to do any hatching on this front face, then it would go vertical. Up that way. So that's the hatching direction I'm using right now. It's not exactly horizontal. You'll see some shifts here and there. And that's where you're basically doing like a quilting effect. You're sort of like weaving these lines together. But I'm not going to just like contrast it with a direction that doesn't really make sense for me. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to do vertical hatching. It's more based on intention and then consistency. You can break it if you want to, but it can be a little bit visually confusing at times. But that's the beauty in this sort of like system of stuff, is that it's also meant to be broken, meant to be played with, and you can do creatively whatever the hell you want. Now we use standards in art to give ourselves an idea of how it's properly maybe done, because we all agree as a community that, hey, that's aesthetically really pleasing. So we use it as a standard, as an approach. But like anything else, like, those standards are meant to be questioned, and this is where you experiment and we redefine what those things mean, and what they can be appear like in as visual. Sorry, for some reason the chat window on my OBS like closed. Let me see if I can actually get it open again. Chat. There we go. The question from KOTO is asking, how could I avoid perfectionism when drawing digitally, like undoing everything over and over again? I saw this funny post today on social media of a photograph of how to quicken your process digital, because it takes forever sometimes digital due to the fact that you're reworking things constantly. And what it was, you undo stuff, right? Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, and they put a photograph of thumbtacks taped to Control and Z, so that you don't touch those. I mean, that's kind of the idea, right? Which is that you're not trying to sit there trying to fix each and every single line. So refraining from doing that may help, but of course, just cutting it out can be difficult, because it could be just now at this point habit, right? You don't like that line, undo. You don't like that line, undo, until you feel satisfied enough that that's the perfect line. But I think that's also just the nature of digital. I think our minds tend to think too severely and heavily because we have so much control. Taking away that control is really the key, and that's where working analog really helps the most, and training that way. And training this way can then also migrate over to digital as well. Because the thing is, in digital work, I actually don't really undo that much, if at all, actually. I mean, I may. I have the ability to do so because it's there, but I don't really do that as much. And then we're going to lightly also hatch on this underside to fill all this underside in shadow. But it's a different value, so I'm hatching a lot more separately, so it doesn't darken it as much. I'm still going to follow a very general, simple direction. This is the edge where it goes into a vertical. Now, you have to understand that there's, way more sort of like details behind this in terms of mentality and what I do. But, most of that kind of stuff I discuss more in my education, so in my classes. And we're not really doing that here. This is not a class. There can be educational resources that you might pick up on. But I'm not here to really teach you anything. It just can be educational inadvertently because of information. But the classes I teach can be a lot more detail oriented based on like what's actually going on in terms of like line and even from like the hatching stuff I'm doing here specifically to like line count, you know. Not to say that I'm trying to tell people how and what's the best way to do it, but more in terms of like why I do certain things and what I'm even trying to do. So at least it gives people an idea and they can then choose how to move forward. Question earlier, Noah was asking, you struggle to see forms and break objects down to simple shapes. Do you have any suggestions on how to train yourself better to observe and see the simple shapes? This is, of course, where the classes step in. And if you had the books, any sort of books that kind of go into that sort of stuff, could that unlock your visualization of these things? To a degree, I think books are there just to kind of give you examples of what's possible, and you can follow them to a T, and it may help initially. And of course, for some individuals, it could be the thing that actually unlocks it, right? But for many others, I feel like even for me, by just like looking at a book, I really didn't learn that much. Like I loved books, and I got a lot of inspiration, but inspiration is different than education, right? So I think for myself, inspiration was really what I tended to kind of find mostly what a resource from book nature stuff. But in education, I needed more of a hands-on. I needed someone to show it to me on hand, and that's where I really responded to the most. Now this is where it said, well, you can go to like a video, right? Like YouTube videos or other recorded videos. But in those pre-recorded videos, you have a person doing a demo one time or a couple of times, and there's no way to ask a question because they're doing something based on how they would approach it. But as you're doing it, you're not going to do exactly the same thing they are because you're just a different person. The way you move, the way you grip the tool, the way you visually see things is just going to be different. So being able to have someone to then analyze your stuff and to help you adjust based on from your perspective, your vantage point as to what I would advise to consider and what to do and what to train is then the kind of the key things, right? So what I'm then also suggesting is that education of having a class is really going to be the you know one of the variables in this sort of equation of things that you need to be doing as an action to strengthen that skill set, really, right? Now, of course, I know that you say to yourselves, like, well, that's not even an option. I can't pay for it. It's too expensive. There's no opportunities. Or it's like you're not interested, right? You don't like maybe this idea of working in a classroom. You don't want to be around the people or sort of thing. Maybe you don't want to, you feel like you're not good enough. Could be a case. And you want to be good enough through your own training that eventually you can take a class. And so because I'll be good enough, I'm, going to be able to get as much out of that education as I can. But that's not the way you're supposed to approach it, in my personal opinion. In logical sense, it actually even makes no sense. You're trying to say that you're trying to be good enough. I'm saying this, to go into a class to take as much as you can out of it. But who's going to tell you you're good enough? You? You're not going to say that because you're always going to be like, man, I can make that better. I got to spend more time doing this. I got to spend more time practicing that. And you're always going to feel dissatisfied with the result of actions that you're doing. And so you'll never allow yourself to move forward and to actually experience those things. In terms of, what I've seen and what I've experienced. I'm very much generalizing, by the way. I'm sure there are many people here that have done very well on just like working on their own, looking at books, and, giving themselves times to accumulate this sort of experience and then maybe taking a class. I'm sure there are many people like that. But I still think that would be more of a minority compared to the majority of us. Zenny is asking, how did I feel when you realized that it's no longer necessary to study the fundamentals so much because you were already familiar enough? Do you feel happy or like you were stagnant? That never stopped. There was never a point in which a study of the fundamentals ever stopped. It may have shifted in terms of time, but also when I was doing the studies. So in education, you have to weigh this sort of like two element of balance, which is your fundamental educational work and then the productions of things you generate either for yourself or a client, right? So both of those scales you're going to be doing even while you're a student. Because if you're a student, you're going to be creating for a classroom and a teacher, and you're going to be creating hopefully for yourself. Now, for some people in education, it could be 90% of education and like 10% for you. And it could be the other way around for some people, where it's like you're all just generating for your own stuff. Or maybe that's professional, right? You work in a job, and it's like 90% of what you're doing, but then 10% you're like training. But either way, the idea is that how you weigh that scale. Every individual, even as you become a junior level student to then professional, you're still going to be constantly balancing. So as you become a professional, and as I've now done this for over 25 years, am I still fundamentally training? I am, but in a slightly different scale balance. So I'll still do this as like a practice of lines and shapes and forms, but because I'm teaching it, it is my sort of opportunity moment to be able to train in it. So I know that some people might think that doesn't make sense. You're teaching it, so how is that practice? Well, it is practice because I'm actually having to physically do it in front of them live. It's not like some pre-recording that I did and I just play the video and they just watch it. I never do it again. I do it every single session of a term in a class, and I've done it for over 15 years, right? So how is that fundamental not stopped? It still goes. I did them yesterday. And I did them last week, from week 1 of class, right? Showing the very basics: lines, circles, form, shapes, how to do it. Jack is asking, do I like graffiti? Yeah, I do. I had a lot of friends in college that were graph artists and wall artists, mural artists as well too. I never did it myself, but I had a lot of friends that did. Especially here in like the LA area, there's a relatively strong, sort of like movement community still for it, I guess. I've gone out and watched them, you know, but I've never actively like done actual work, graffiti work on walls. And tagging to me is different than like graph work. So that, I mean, they can bomb a wall if they want to, but some of the people I'm watching do, they're sitting there for hours doing an actual mural that also would have been commissioned. Maybe a local business on a wall blank while they wanted a piece there. In my current knowledge right now, how would I teach my younger self to use watercolor? Um, in terms of if I know that what I said earlier about watercolor was like just use it, right? It's like a toy. The more you play with it, the more you're familiar you get to its thing. And familiarity of a tool is kind of a key component, right? So you can get comfortable with the thing that you're using. But there must be something else beyond that. So I guess that's a good question to put. It's like if I was to teach myself what to do with it, like what would I actually say? First and foremost, limit the colors. Maybe just go value only, black and white, and grayscale. So ink wash can be good, but also using watercolor is fine. So value studies is what you go for initially. Practice that enough times, obviously, from there. Even doing first line work and just doing black and white with ink or watercolor, either way. But then adding that additional value. And it's not just like the whole 100% value, you limit it down to also value sets. Is it a 2 value system, 3 value system, or more, right? 2 values are black and white. 3 values is black, white, gray. You can add more if you want to go from there, a full value system. From there, you can introduce a monotone, a single color. And this is how we painted with materials. When I used to paint with acrylics or oils back in the day in school, that's how we were introduced and how we trained. We did monotone paintings constantly. And then we studied the way light works by observation. We have a red light, what's the shadow? Is it green? It should be because that's a complementary, right? If it's a cool light, it's going to be a warm shadow. So that sort of understanding of color theory comes into play. But then, this is where the information I would just show, convey, research, look at books and also videos and teach it, and then actively physically do it, right? Onto the page. So we create things like color charts and also value charts from like 0 to 100%. Can you actually capture those true values? We did this in school with gouache. I would do no different than with watercolor, right? And then from there, when it comes to watercolor itself, is there some tip, trick that I would maybe initially kind of convey? I mean, one thing I would say is start very thin paint, a lot of water, right? And this is a layering build-up process. And watercolor can be great in terms of it being a really quick sort of media to apply, But also, the more time you give it, the better results you can get. One bit of advice I would give also the watercolor is, understand that you cannot bring up your highlights and using unless you're using white paint. Most times I try not to do so because I use the paper itself as a highlight. So being able to mask things off, not maybe physically, but understanding in your drawing where they go, preemptively designing that can help a lot too. But drawing is key. Knowing how to draw will help tremendously on your watercolor paintings. But that's also just in painting in general. That's why drawing and painting go hand in hand. And drawing always comes first. Drawing and sketching always comes first compared to painting. Every great painter usually has great skill in being able to draw. So this is a felt tip brush pen. HG, in terms of how my eyes are doing, they're doing much better. I still have a little bit of residual effect. That's why I've been telling people I'm like at 95%. So generally, most of the vision's back. The fatigue is slightly there, but no longer so to the levels of which like I'm get knocked out by like 9 p.m. Or like my eyes feel droopy or like sleepy. But it's the edges. If I look to the right or the left extremely to the edges, like my edge of my peripherals, there's a bit of double vision there still. But it's not painful, and nor is it completely just like hindering my sort of day-to-day life. For all I know, that could now be an actual lifelong effect. Having double vision at the edges of my peripherals, but it's only at the very extreme edges. Trevin's asking, does the way you hold your pen change when you're drawing and when you're writing? No, it's the same. What I call this is a standard writer's grip. This is something I talk about in my classes all the time too. This is a writer's grip. But how you grip it doesn't matter. That's based on how you use a tool when you're a child to now. And if you have the dexterity to be able to move the tool that you can to produce the line that you want, then you're good. Don't worry about it. The grip doesn't actually affect performance, in my personal opinion, unless it's painful. If it's causing pain, then you should change it. Zoom out a little bit here. So far, the piece does it achieve kind of the ideas of things that I want. It's close. I think there's elements that I like about this. I'm probably going to keep a very similar kind of composition. One of the key elements of shifts that I want to make is I want to bring them closer together. That's kind of the big shift in the next piece I want to make for this one. Because I'm definitely going to do this one again. I want to experience it again. I want to try it again. I want to just see it again. And what I'm probably going to do is bring them closer. And as I bring them closer, I want to maybe recapture that. I want to turn the bottom plane of the ground more open. This one's too narrow. It's too flat. So if I brought this down here, which I probably can still do actually, if it was down here, that would be a little bit more ideal. This effect I gotta move. But let's keep hatching away at this one just to push it a little bit further visually. I'm probably going to try to research a little bit more, but the thing about characters like this that come from different cultures, like one's supposed to be, Southeast Asian, the one's supposed to be Korean. Things like this, like the headdress may help. I might incorporate patterns of the costume, clothing, but because it's such a small scale, it'd be really hard to do so. But it can still help. That sort of stuff can help. Korean culture, actually, and a lot of their clothing is very basic. It's like a lot of just white, very loose fabricy. They have those like special hats, like the horsehair hats, but that's more like a, high status, not really high status, but more of a formal wear, I guess you would call it. But this character is supposed to be more poor, growing up in like the farmlands kind of stuff. And it's also very more ancient story. So it's not like modern culture, like Singaporean to Korean. Um, the mythology of the characters being older set, they're not going to follow the same sort of like costuming guidelines what we have now, which I don't want to just force that in. So in this case, trying to show the distinct sort of maybe storytelling would be the case, but more just a visual sort of identity can be tricky. Color would really help, but I'm not probably going to color this one. I'm probably going to make it black and white, and I'm just not really going to worry about that. It's like, does this recognize as a Korean character? Does that recognize as a character from Southeast Asia? It's like, well, it's like, no, but it's okay. But even then, it's like, without a title, would people even know who these characters are? No. Unless I explained it to them or there was a title, which I'm going to add. This will be a title with both the names of the characters. Then, of course, through people sort of like research, they would have to find out. But not every single piece of art is supposed to like actually verbally or visually explain every single detail for the audience to like understand 100% of like the history background of these characters and the cultural sort of significance of it. That's really not the point per se. It may stimulate an interest of curiosity, like, oh, who are these characters and where do they come from? Who are they? But it's all then about just visual outcome. Like, it just looks cool. Okay, it looks nice, and then that itself can be more than enough for just the audience. So that's why I'm not going to be so adamant. Like, oh, what did Korean people in the 14th century wear? It's like I don't know. Can we find that even? Maybe there's some like records, from historical documents or museums and stuff. But and yes, we probably could find that out. But more than likely, you're just going to be wearing basic garb of fabric and cotton, or silk. And it may not be very special looking unless he was some sort of like high end figure of some status and culture, some government official or some sort of military figure. They might have some distinct sort of like costuming. But if he's just a farm boy, then it's like rags, you know? So how is that supposed to be specifically to a single culture where any culture could have people that grow up in a farmland, they'll be pretty much looking the same. And then because stylistically they'll be somewhat similar, again, it's like, yeah, Southeast Asian people to Korean people may have, differences in look in terms of structure, but as a drawing, am I going to be so concerned by that? No. See a couple questions and comments. The question from AI usually pops up once every session, and so Zenny's asking, what do I think about AI? Should you be worried about it? Am I worried about it? No. Should you be worried about it? I would say no, but I understand why you are. you know, Especially if you're a younger generation, I completely understand. Because if I put myself in your shoes, why wouldn't I be worried, right? Because then we're talking about a grouping of individuals that are coming out of their education that haven't established themselves just yet. They have no career, they have no niche, they don't have a market, they don't have a platform. So if you're, 23, 24 years old coming out of college or out of your education, or even if you're older and like shifting your sort of like career and starting over, and if you're fresh and brand new, it's like, what do you do, right? Should you be worried? Yeah, there is a cause for worry. Should that stop you? I don't see why it would or should. I have a lot of people that I've seen or have come across that would give up, and it's more of a sign of really them, not as a level of quality of artist, but their level of. It's not so much a judgment in terms of like, you know, the quality of them as a person, but it does tell you a lot, you know. In those sort of like hardships, I get it. It's a real threat, and it's something that I don't agree with. Um, but do you just stop creating because there's going to be no work opportunities anymore, so why bother? Because you like drawing, because you like creating. But if the worry is, but I can't get a job then. Well, if a job is what you're really worried about, there's a lot of other things you can do to make money. I mean, when I was coming out of school, and when I went to school for art, I mean, it was a job on my mind. When I went to college, I wasn't thinking about what kind of job I was going to have. Initially, it's like I wanted to create stories and tell and make comics. I didn't think about like I wonder how much money I would make. I wonder how successful I'll be in that part. I had no idea. If you told me that, asked me that at 21 years old, say, oh, if you become a comic artist, do you know how much you're gonna make? Do you think you'll be able to survive financially? I had no idea. you know, all I know is that I like comics. I want to draw comics since high school. Going into college at 21, I want to draw comics. Not knowing anything about the industry, not knowing anything about the level of difficulty and competition, I just like doing comics. But then I went to school and found out, oh, I can actually get this kind of job, and there's an industry for this. But right now, it's like, okay, the industry is a little bit harder to get into. Uh, yeah, and that could maybe like halter your sort of like enthusiasm to get out there and go for it. But would that stop me still? It'd be a little frustrating. It's like, man, this sucks. That all this is going on. But I think just the fact that I still very much just enjoy. I can't think of anything else to do. Even when I was in my 20s, like there was nothing else I wanted to do. I knew I just wanted to do this. Would I survive financially? I have no idea. I would have been like, I have no clue if I'll make it. Then I probably would have like been a little bit worried about that. But while I was creating it, it's like I didn't. I had to do it. You know, so it certainly wouldn't have stopped me then nor now, because the industry itself will shift, and hopefully it won't be 100% of just that whole AI thing. It may, and it's already kind of going down that route in terms of you'll see a lot of things already being produced by it. Um, now, there's a reason why again. Okay, so what's the answer now, right? What do I tell people most of the times? Well, the reason why I'm not worried and why I still then think students should not be worried, even though you are, why I think you should not be, is because the industry still needs trained people. It still needs the trained eyes to be able to fix what the AI can't. And so, what is happening currently today? Well, there's a lot of positions open for, let's say, AI artists, as what they've labeled them, okay? And so, as these quote unquote artists who have no formal training are learning to run the technology in the program to be able to visually, sort of like excrete this thing, um, what they may come to realize is that in the industry, there needs to be a lot of like back and forth, adjustments, refinements, corrections. Things change. The art director doesn't like it anymore. We want something else. We want there to be a slight shift of that, or whatever the case is. But even then, the overall general quality, when it comes to the actual piece, and then of course the individual, the clients may not be trained enough to know how to fix it. They know they want that fixed, but it's like they don't know how to tell you how to fix it. They said just change it, right? So if you don't know how to change it and you're an AI artist, you're like, well, what do I even type in at that point? And what you're going to find is that a lot of the industry is probably already going down this route, is that they're having to turn to. Oh, did we freeze? My OBS is frozen. Give me 1 second. What happened? Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can turn off the video. This has never happened before. So I wonder what's going on. Yeah, it's frozen on the YouTube one as well too. My webcam is fine, but the overhead camera has locked up. What I'm going to try to do then is close that one, and I'm going to add another video, create new, and go to my Camlink 4. And that didn't do it. Hold on. That's just my desktop. One moment, please. A little bit of technical error. I wonder if there's a way to refresh it on OBS. I'm not quite sure. properties, deactivate, activate. I deactivated and activated it. That didn't work. What I might do is turn off my camera real fast and turn it back on. Maybe turning it on and off may help. Or we might have to like end it today a little bit sooner. Or I just turn to my webcam. Configure video. Hold on, let me try that. Let me turn it off real quickly. Yeah, OBS is not even registering it. Sorry about that. I'll have to problem solve this maybe at some point later on, because right now this might be an OBS problem, really. Because OBS seems to be a little bit janky right now at the moment. It's not really responding to things the way I want it to. Okay, well, what I might do, we can finish off with maybe just my webcam. Just talk a little bit more. I'm sorry you can't see the camera. I apologize. I would hoped. Let me see here. Let me create a new. Let's turn to my webcam for the moment. Sorry about that. We'll start over again in the future. We'll do another stream and we'll get it more going. So at the moment, this is kind of where it was at. Okay. The overhead cam decided to kind of fall apart on us. We already kind of went in for an hour and 40, so it's good for now. I'll probably have to just like restart my computer, update OBS, and see where it's going. But thankfully, the stream is still on. It didn't just like crap out on me. But for the moment, let me just finish off with answering a couple more questions, and we can kind of close off for today. So we're gonna go back a little bit. And sorry if I missed your questions, because it was in the top of the feed of the chat. But one of the questions from Overdrive is, do you have to figure out what to draw in your mind before you draw it on paper, or you figure it out as you go? It's a combination of both, where it's like you fall back on your fundamental training about knowing what certain base things kind of look like, and you're able to use that to kind of like project it as a visual in your mind, onto the page. And then you start to figure it out as you go. Like, for instance, like the piece I'm doing right now, like I said, it's just like, there was some idea in my head, and I just kind of went straight in and just like problem solve it out. Now, of course, I would recommend with people that are still developing their skills that you do as much thumbnailing. This is like that small thing we did afterwards, right? Just to like figure out what's going on. You would do as many of these as you can in the beginning, just to like give yourself a chance, right? So to me, this is still very much like my own thumbnail in a way. And I'm going to do more of them, but that's kind of where it comes from, essentially, right? Zenny was asking, is there a lesson you learned from Kim Jong-gi that you think everyone should know? I mean, what we've been talking about up to this point, which is about this sort of like sense of passion, maybe was a word that's commonly used. It's maybe a bit overused at this point. The hunger is like kind of the word I like to go for. Just the drive of wanting to pursue the love of it. But really, there is no like, sort of like a lesson that comes in mind from Kim Jong-gi at all. It's just the fact that, again, he was just another cool person. He was just someone I got to know as a friend. And because of that, you get to see that side of, everyone sees this one thing, like the drawing that they do, and they see it on social media, and you start to project this sort of image of this person. But that's why it's like, get to meet some individuals at like shows and conventions, and hopefully some of them, especially most of them, are going to be, not meeting this sort of expectation, but you get to know the fact that they're just regular people. And this sort of idea of like celebritization of, especially within our art community, I'm not a big fan of, honestly. I get why it happens, especially when in this day and age with social media becoming, such a massive thing, and this idea of being a celebrity has become even microcosm, like smaller things, where you can just have a decent following on like Instagram. All of a sudden, you're like quote unquote famous, which is like ridiculous. Um, you know, I think it's not a waste of time, but it's a very human thing. But then also when you start to like really get out there and present yourself and meet these sort of people, you get to really get to decide to know that they're just regular individuals as well, which then gives you a framework of idea that there's no reason why you can't get there also. That's the idea, right? We don't want to necessarily put people at the level of like celebritization on a pedestal to the point where you feel like you can't be that thing. They can be good inspirations, but it shouldn't necessarily refrain you from wanting to try to achieve that. Now, I know someone like even Kim Jong Il's status was so big that I think most people here would probably feel like I would never be him. I'm not even trying to say that you would try to be that individual. It's just that you try to find who you are, and those people can give you a sense of an inspiration of a direction, but it shouldn't necessarily stifle you because you feel like it would never be achieved, that you're going to be at the same level at all. It doesn't matter if you're same level or not at all or not. It's just that it gives you then the incentive and the drive and the interest and the love that you'll find it for yourself personally, whatever that level may be, whether it's greater or lower or equivalent or even a complete distance to. That's what then you have to come to realize. It's no longer then about you chasing this idea of what you think you need to be based on what social media tells you, but you'll find it because you'll give yourself enough time and chances and love for the things that you do. Um, let's see. I'm gonna go down a little bit. So I'm gonna skip some of the questions real quickly here. Nathan from Comic Con, what would you recommend more when it comes to watercolor? We talked about watercolor today. You personally use a 24 color kit, but I've been thinking about using individual tubes. When it comes to the type of watercolor, like kit or tube paint, doesn't matter. Because even with the tube paint, I only use tube paint to refill the cakes, essentially. I don't use watercolor paint directly out of the tube most times. And even if it's like a limited palette, it could be a 6 color, 12 color, 24 color, doesn't really matter. For watercolor, again, as I mentioned, what I would do is start with very much just value painting, monotone, and then the like limited palettes, and build up from there. Do a lot of studies of actual paintings that exist already too, right? And just get familiar to the material, basically. Let's see. Arrow Locked In is asking, you're studying from an art exam in a month and wanted to ask how to improve from an amateur, like making proper compositions in 30 minutes or less with no references. I use Pinterest, but is that really viable? Yeah, and for an art exam, I'm assuming you're timed. I've never had an art exam in my entire life. I think maybe like in some Asian sort of like colleges or universities or schools may have stuff like this. Sort of these exams that kind of have entry or even tests of like where you are. But when I was in school, exams in art as a testing to time was never implemented. We would maybe have homework that we work on for like weeks on weeks and then submit it on the final day to get the sort of like feedback of our implementation of our training. But to come into, let's say, an exam to be like, hey, you have this amount of time to produce this thing is like kind of unheard of, I guess. I could be misinterpreting your comment and question, but then you're also asking about like doing compositions in like 30 minutes or less with no references. That sort of stuff is accumulated in time. Was I able to do that sort of stuff in 30 minutes or less without references when I was in school? No. you know was I able to do it right after school in a couple years? Not really. But after 10, 15, 20 years I was able to acquire that sort of skill set. Then you think it's like, that's a lot of time. And so it's going to take you that much time? Maybe. It might take you half that time. It might take you double that time. And I always tell people, it's like, are you willing to spend that time regardless of it, right? Are you willing to spend an entire life achieving it? That's the question. I want to come down a little bit. HE is also saying, you met me at Comic Con San Diego a few years ago. You were doing an apprenticeship. Oh, yeah, I remember that. You would hang out and watch me sketch and draw. I remember you, absolutely. Yeah. I wasn't at Comic Con this year because of that, my conditioning thing. But I think you were part of another school out there too, right? I can't remember the name of the school, but yes, I remember. So the question here is, do I require an interview for the one-on-one mentorship? So for the mentorship that I offer, I usually do require that. About maybe a quick 10-minute interview, just to get a sense of first who you are, what you want, and do I fit into that equation, right? And lastly, how well do we gel? Because if I'm going to spend one-on-one time with you for up to 2 months, every week, I got to make sure that I'm actually going to give you something that is of not of value per se, but applied to the direction that you need at the moment. And so through the interview, I get a sense about where you are, your skill, that sort of stuff. And I don't just turn people down because I feel like they can't do certain things well enough. It's not really that. It's what do you need at the moment? Can I supply that? Do I want to supply that in the first place? And do we actually communicate properly, right? So I don't think forcing that sort of stuff of action on one on ones is a good thing in terms of education, nor something I would want to do, especially at the cost that it can come at. So I want to make sure that there's a full confidence both on both parties, my end and their end. So yes, an interview usually is the case. So Dwinster is saying you actually had one in 2001 Jamaica, CXC Art. We had pieces we worked on over 10th and 11th grade that were submitted. Then we had a 3-hour exam to make sure we actually did the pieces. Interesting. So they actually tested you that you actually properly did it even out of school. That's again for me. I've never heard of that. That's pretty interesting to hear. I like hearing about it because it's so unique to kind of hear the different experience of art education and where it comes from and how they're approaching it. Um, the reason why the art exam approach is so unique to me and why I feel like educationally I can see benefits, but I can also see why it probably wouldn't be sort of like useful per se. Um, is that everybody works at different speeds and different sort of like processes because they see things differently. They use different elements of training from the stuff that they already acquired. They themselves are going to process it and see it even structurally differently. The outcome can look the same, and the deadline's all the same. So if you're given a certain amount of time, let's say a week of homework, every individual will balance that time uniquely to their own, based on their own schedule, based on their working habits, based on their interests and some stuff and prioritizations. But in that week, they still have to get all that done at the same time, everyone. But then if you tell everyone, okay, you're now going to be doing a 3-hour exam and cramming it all and forcing somebody where they haven't actually, and having them train exactly the same as well too, doesn't make sense. Because the idea about even training fundamentally to building disciplines and doing things, what we do in the art industry as professionals, is that we develop a sense of self identity, not just in style, but in our mentality of process, how we make it, how we go from A to B, and how we problem solve things. And so cramming that in a 3-hour period for every single person to do it exactly the same doesn't create then the individual that makes them hireable. Imagine it like this. Imagine if 10 people were doing art exams and trained exactly the same to do a 3-hour exam and produce the same thing, right? And let's say they all got A's, high marks, and they produce really high quality stuff. Who do you hire out of those 10 people? Who do you hire, right? So then it doesn't make sense. The idea is that not everybody's hireable. Why? Because we are all different. Some of us will achieve certain things based on skill level sets, some of us won't because of certain element or circumstances. Either because, hey, we're not good in certain skills of prioritizing time. Maybe we're not as interested. Maybe we find where our priorities are somewhere else, right? Maybe we just don't have the hunger. And not everyone is supposed to make it. That's just the reality of life. You may not make it there, but they might make it somewhere else. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be able to achieve their successes and careers and wants and stuff like that. I'm just saying that life isn't going to be like that, right? Not everyone gets the exact same thing. You might get successes in something else, and you have to go find it. If you don't find it, it's because you're not driven enough to go get it. But if you have 10 people doing the exact same thing with the same art exam and still even get success and passing grades, what does that achieve, right? It doesn't create any sort of like growth beyond the actual parameter that the school established. You're supposed to be better than that. And the only way to overcome it is to present a problem, and you have to then find a way of a solution that may not be achieved in 3 hours. Maybe you do need a week, right? And the reality in terms of like industry and deadlines, that sometimes it could be a 3 hour sort of like period of like submitting something, but you could also have like 3 days. It's about adaptability. You got to have the skills to be able to do all those things. But if you just conform everyone to do the exact same stuff and process, it doesn't then create that sort of variable. And that's what creates the uniqueness of an individual in art, design, even commercial work. The individual and how they then sort of like curate that work and develop their skills to come to this point in who they are as a professional, is either going to create longevity or not. But I also understand that what you're talking about is just the traditions of the school. That's the curriculum that's been built up. And especially when it comes to, let's say, like colleges and universities that have certain sort of requirements based on degrees and what the state might request or a country might request to be able to achieve certain things on the degree of outcome. I mean, it's like that's how the education works, especially like in Asia, as I said, like in China, even like Russia. The places in those parts of the country, their art background and education is still very classical and traditional, atelier level stuff, and a lot of them is just based on like copy paste, and it creates really high skills in terms of that sort of like material manipulation, but it creates no individuals. But that's also part of their culture as well too, right? Um, which is why it's shifting. It's shifting already, especially like in China, as you have a lot of these products in games and comics and animation. You see a lot more successful stuff now because a lot of the current generation had trained outside of the country, and then they came back, and now they're making their own stuff. So you see some really cool stuff coming out now from them. And so, question here is: you're having trouble drawing details on plaster statues. Uh, any give you any advice? I mean, this is where trial and error, repetition, time, patience is all a part of it. Start small and then work your way big, from that sort of stuff. Do partition studies, call outs, study just the mouth, just the nose, just the ear. Understand those components first and put them together. That could be another thing too. What material are you using? Use a material, based on what you are familiar with. Different ones are going to achieve different things. Copy a lot. Do I think it's a waste of time to work on projects that you don't enjoy? Yes and no. There are certain things I think you should go through to be able to learn how to come out to the end finishing things. Even if you don't fully enjoy it, you understand the nature behind what needs to be done to get the project done, right? Whether it was about like a scheduling issue, a working process method, a certain sort of media, a certain sort of like product you're making. There are certain qualities of information that you learn based on that, right? Because in the industry, that's very much going to be the case. You're not going to work on things you always like, and so as you get to those like moments where you're working in the industry, you still have to get the job done. They're paying you, so having experiences where you actually can get through that too in school is important, which I have done. And how we would do that, we would work in team projects. As you work in a team, it's like you don't just get to decide, hey, we're working on this project, and everyone has to follow me. You have to work with like 4 or 5 other people. You have to like compromise. Well, this person has that idea, that person has this idea, that person wants to do this thing. How do we come together and make this thing successful and finish the project to get graded? And we get to contribute. So in the industry, you might have less choice in that, but still, being able to collaborate and to compromise is a big part of the lesson. Okay, we've been talking actually on the camera now for about, like 10, 15 minutes, but yes, for those of you that are jumping on at the moment, we were drawing earlier, but the camera crapped out on us. Let me see if it's actually working at all again. No, it's not. It's dead. It's most likely the program. I think it glitched out. So we'll have to set it up another time. I'll do another live stream at some point as well. Today I was just doing kind of a quick sketch, almost like a thumbnail, just to like see this piece of illustration I wanted to create. Next time when we come back together, we'll do another piece, and not the same one, maybe something else, but just to kind of hang out, talk with each other. But we're just kind of wrapping things up at this point. It's been almost 2 hours, just to be able to kind of chat and finish off with any other questions. And so if there are any other last comments, questions now, please let me know because we're going to close this off very soon. Next time I come on board, most likely after Lightbox Expo, because this weekend is the Lightbox Expo here in Pasadena. If anybody's planning to attend the show, come by and say hi. I'm going to be with the Super Ronnie crew. It'll be me, Dong Ho Kim, Eliza Ivanova, Stonehouse, and also Victor Kalbachev is coming. So the five of us will be at a booth for Super Ronnie, and we'll be there to live draw, to do a talk, and to obviously interact and answer questions. So if you're going to be at Lightbox Expo, please come by and say hi, and we'll have books available, live drawings available, and our time available. So it should be a good event. Starts this Friday, goes until Sunday. If you're in the local, SoCal area, or if you're visiting from out of town, we were having some international people coming in. I already have some schools contacting me saying they're about to visit. A lot of people from domestic states and whatnot are going to come by as well too. So it's a great international sort of show at this point. One that I will recommend in the future you plan for as well. Last couple questions here. Did I read, watch Lord of the Mysteries? No, I haven't actually. Lord of the Mysteries. I'll take a look into it. Never heard of it actually. Maybe I have or seen it, but I just don't remember at this point. Um, Put a notification on all your devices next time. Yeah, I always post a story. Anytime I go on a live stream, I always post a story about it. It's always not the same story, but I do post it. Usually like 10-15 minutes before. Nathan, good luck on your assignment. Hope you did a good job. Are there people who live stream these events? I'm actually thinking now that you mentioned that. Speaking about live events or live streaming events, I thought about maybe doing that at Lightbox there. If anybody who's not locally in, let's say, like California, or if you're international, if you're interested, having, let's say, a live stream at the event, I would consider doing one on my phone. Basically, it'd be just an overhead projecting, just like capturing, whatever I'm drawing, and I would live stream maybe like an hour or two, as like per usual. If you guys are interested, I will consider doing that. It would have to be at a set time, which obviously would be in the morning in terms of Pacific time, which may not be the best for some international people, but it's something I may hold at least once. Sure, yeah, I'll check it out. Lord of Mysteries. Yeah, how about them Chargers, huh? It's still my team. Um, they're it's still early. It's not even half the way through the season, but hopefully it turns around. The next two games would be important. Super interested from Mayploy, yeah. So I'll consider that. I'll probably just do an overhead stream from. We'll test it out, see how it goes. Even if the internet, I don't even know if the internet connections are going to be really good. Because what we usually do is we just record these things and then like post it on YouTube afterwards as a recording. But live streams are always fun for questions and stuff. The only thing about it, of course, is it's a live event, so that means that it may not be happening as like a visual thing on the screen because I may be talking to somebody, so I may not be drawing. So it's not always like the most sort of like linear stream per se, but it could be interesting to kind of have a sense of ambiance or set of a scene. I may stream first where you get to kind of walk around. Maybe I'll do that initially too. Like I'll do a walk around of the show to kind of like even. That's another thing that pops in my head. I keep thinking of stuff. Now that you guys all present that question, I'm like thinking all these things I got to do. I always wanted to do this in the past, but I haven't done it yet. Which is to what I would want to do is like record like these small little interviews with artists and friends that I know at the show. Quick introductions. What are they selling? What's their table at? That kind of stuff. But a live stream could be interesting. But yeah, live streaming me walking around, introducing some of the tables, different artists that are there. Maybe spend like a good 40 minutes, an hour doing that, and then come back to the booth and then like draw for another hour. That's a possibility. When that would need to happen, most likely Saturday, maybe Friday, maybe Saturday. The knowledge should be interesting on both parties, where I get to like ask some questions, especially the artists there. It might be a little bit hard auditory wise because it can be loud at the show. So usually having their own little mic is really good, but maybe I should look into that before I go to the show, like something I can hook up to my phone. I'm sure they have those, right? Like a little mic you can actually hard cable to, or even like as a Bluetooth connect to the phone as a microphone. I actually have a mic, but I have to test and see if it actually works on my phone or not. Anyways, stuff that's logistics. I'll think about that stuff later on. In any case, interesting ideas. I'll consider them. This weekend is Lightbox Expo. Potentially look forward to a live stream, either by just at the table, me drawing, or possibly me walking around, introducing you guys to the show. With this YouTube channel, we've kind of like, grown it a little bit. It's at about, what, 70 something thousand subscribers, which is nice. I never expected any sort of growth off of this. It'd be nice to hit that 100. That'd be great, but it's going to be a long while, probably another year or two. But in any case, thank you guys for joining in. I hope you guys were able to hang out for a bit, ask questions, and enjoy your time. I know that we didn't get to see the entirety of the whole process because the camera was kind of like being finicky, but we'll get that sorted out next time. Last question from Apollo: is the Dynamic Bible on Superani the official book? It is the official book from Superani. That's mine. Second book will be out next year in July. That's the plan. I'm working on it now. It was supposed to be this year, but because I got sick, it got delayed. But next year will be for sure because I'm already in the process of making it. Most of the pages are somewhat done drawing wise. We'll have to design the book early this coming year, and then we'll be set. So it'll be out by next year. In any case, thank you guys for your time again. I will see you all next stream, potentially this weekend. Keep drawing and sketching. I will see you all.